Wisconsin Court of Appeals, appointed to the bench by Governor Scott Walker. He won election in April of 2017. He has served as Governor Walker's chief legal counsel. Judge Hagedorn previously worked as an assistant attorney general for the Department of Justice and a law clerk for State Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman. He is married, and he and his wife are the parents of 5 children. Judge Lisa Neubauer has served on the Court of Appeals since 2008, appointed by Governor Doyle, re-elected in 2014 and named Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals in 2015, reappointed in May of 2018. Judge Neubauer previously spent decades as a Wisconsin litigation attorney. She served as a law clerk for federal judge Barbara Crabb. She and her husband are parents to 3 children. We welcome you both tonight. Thank you for being here. Here is tonight's format. This is how it'll work, some ground rules. The candidates will have 90 seconds each to answer each question. The first candidate responding can then signal for a 30-second rebuttal. We'll have a final 1-minute statement from each of the candidates. We tossed a coin just a few minutes ago, and Judge Neubauer will get 2 minutes for the first opening statement. Judge Neubauer, welcome, and you may begin.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the State Bar of Wisconsin, to WISC Politics, and to our moderators for sponsoring and organizing this event. I am so grateful to have this opportunity to be able to speak directly to the voters about this incredibly important Supreme Court race on April 2nd. So yes, I'm Lisa Neubauer. I am Chief Judge of the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. I live in Racine, Wisconsin, where my husband and I raised 3 wonderful children. I have over 30 years experience in the law. I was a litigator for almost 20 years before joining the Court of Appeals in 2008. So I now have over 11 years of experience as an appellate judge. I was appointed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court to be the chief of our court in 2015 and then again last spring in 2018. My record shows that I am tough but fair. My record shows that I am fair, impartial, and independent as a judge. And that is what this race is all about. We have to have our next justice be fair, impartial, independent. And that is why I am so honored to have the support of over 345 judges. That is 98% of the endorsing judges in this race. They come from red counties, blue counties, over 80 sheriffs, DAs, former DAs. They know our record, and they trust that I will be fair, impartial, and independent on the Supreme Court if I am honored to be elected by the people of this state.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn, welcome. 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Great, thank you. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all today. I want to thank you all for your interest in this race as well, all those who are listening at home and in the audience here. In particular, I want to point out my lovely wife, Christina. As was mentioned, we have been married for 17 years. We have 5 beautiful children from the ages of 5 to 15, so my house is very loud and lots of fun. And we're really glad to be raising our family right here in Wisconsin. I am a Wisconsin kid, born and raised. And, you know, we come from a family, we didn't have money, we didn't have any political connections, I didn't really know any lawyers in my family, but we did have a commitment to our country and to service. And my one grandfather fought during the Korean War conflict, later was a Wauwatosa police officer. My other grandfather fought across World War II, fought across Europe during World War II, and was a prisoner of war, actually helped liberate the concentration camp Dachau. And in the middle of all that, I began to have my own desire for public service. And that ended up taking me to Northwestern University School of Law, and then came back to Wisconsin here to live and practice and begin raising my family. And so began my career in private practice and then moved into public service. I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court, so I've been there. I've actually helped do the work, the reading and writing and the research. In fact, actually, that's where I first got a desire to actually be a judge in the first place. I was an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice. And then as chief legal counsel to Governor Walker, I was involved in some of the most significant cases in state history and gave advice at the highest of levels. And now as a judge in the Court of Appeals, I've been able to put my judicial philosophy into practice over hundreds and hundreds of cases. And this race really is about the future of the court in judicial philosophy. I believe my job as a judge is to say what the law is and not what I think the law should be. My job is to uphold the Constitution as written, which I'm committed to, and also protecting the public. Proud to have the support of 44 sheriffs across the state of Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Police Association, and many others who believe that they can trust me to help keep our communities safe.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. And now we begin our questions. And the first question is for Judge Hagedorn, and it comes from Jessica Arp.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. While many in our audience may be familiar with you tonight, this may be the first chance for many voters in the state to get to know more about you. As part of your campaigns this year, you have both highlighted personal stories in your life. Judge Neubauer, you've shared that you were a plaintiff in a case that challenged unconstitutional strip searches in Chicago. Judge Hagedorn, you've shared your journey as an adoptive parent to a baby born addicted to opioids. Can you explain to voters how these personal experiences have influenced your judicial thinking? And Judge Hagedorn, this question to you first.
Yeah, thank you. As we mentioned, I have 5 children. So our youngest daughter, Lily, she's 5 years old. She is adopted. And it's interesting, my wife and I had long thought about adoption. It was not something we had always knew whether it would happen or not, but a few years ago we began to explore it and found out about a birth mother in the Chicago area, actually, I'm sorry, Peoria area. So it was a foreign adoption. She's from Illinois. But she was addicted to drugs, and many different drugs involved in that. And we were actually able to be there in the hospital with her when she was born. They voluntarily gave her to us. We were actually in the delivery room when she was born as well. I was in a strategically placed corner of the delivery room, but I was there nonetheless. And, Lily is doing great. She was born addicted to opiates for about 5, 6, 7 days in the hospital. And she's doing wonderful. But the thing is, that's a story that's repeated all across the state of Wisconsin. Lily's doing great. She's happy. She's healthy. But it is a personal story of how drugs can impact families. We have an open adoption with birth mom and birth dad whom we love, we care for very deeply. We still are in contact with them. And so, it's important for us to show compassion and to help those who are hurting. The court does that through things like drug treatment courts and other kinds of initiatives, but also to hold people accountable. And that is a big part of what we do as judges and a big part of how we think about keeping our communities safe.
Judge Neubauer, that question for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the question because it is important that the voters get to know us in terms of who we are as people. I think the voters really want, frankly, somebody who has integrity, someone that they know is just a plain good person. So to your question about the strip search, yes, on my website I have a video that highlights really why I decided to go into the law and why I decided that being a judge was something I really would want to do in terms of serving the public. When I was 21 years old, I went to Chicago with some friends, and we went to a concert, and we were walking down the street, and there were tickets on every car, and one of my friends thought that was funny, and he picked up a ticket, twirled it around, was putting it back on the car, and he was arrested by an officer. I went down to get him out, and I was taken back by a woman officer and strip searched. And I was a political science major from Madison. I had taken con law, constitutional law, and I knew that was not constitutional. So I immediately decided that I was going to pursue that legally, and I filed a claim. Shortly after, Donahue did a show, and we started a lawsuit, and we changed the policies. I was Jane Doe #1 in that suit. And we saw how the courts were so important in protecting our rights.
Thank you, Judge Neubauer. Our next question, we will begin with Judge Neubauer, and it comes from J.R. Ross.
Thank you again for being here. Personal stories aside, for many judges or formative law education and studies of justices and decisions hold primary influence over their philosophy as judges and how they decide cases. We'd like to know who was the most influential state or U.S. Supreme Court justice, or what decision did they make or issue that has been key in your development as a judge?
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. I've been asked that question many times on this campaign trail. And honestly, I am a woman who has a 30-year career in the law. As I said, I practiced for 20 years, and I've now been on the Court of Appeals for 11 years. I've decided thousands and thousands of cases. And what my record shows is really what I asked to be judged on. My record is is not a blank slate. I literally have thousands of decisions. And so to the extent people want to understand sort of where I come from, what my philosophy is, I ask that they judge me based on my record. What that shows is that I am tough but fair, and that I now have the support of over 345 judges because they trust me to be fair, impartial, and independent. My opponent has had a very significant partisan history as Governor Walker's legal counsel for over 5 years. The largest chunk of his legal career was as a political operative with the governor. And this race is really about the voters deciding who they trust to be fair, impartial, and independent on our really important highest court of our state.
Judge Hagedorn, your chance to answer JR's question.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's unfortunate that Judge Neubauer doesn't want to answer the question, because I think it's really important for the people of Wisconsin to know what their justices really believe. And there really are differences in judicial philosophy. This is a real thing. This is why we have debates over nominations for justices to the Supreme Court, because philosophies matter. And Judge Neubauer doesn't want to share hers, but I will share mine. I think it's important to be honest and transparent with the people of Wisconsin. So I'm an originalist and a textualist, and that means my job is to pay attention to what the law actually says. That means no putting your own politics in there, no putting your own philosophies in there, no outcome at the end of the day, no thumb on the scale, but just being faithful to the law as it's written. So when it comes to statutes, I read what the law says. When it comes to the Constitution, I look for the original public meaning of a constitutional text. There are a number of judges who have articulated that and lived that out. Justice Clarence Thomas is certainly an example. Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court obviously has passed now, I think, is an example of that. Justice Gorsuch, who's been on there as well, is somebody who has been very articulate in laying those things out. And so that is what I believe. That is how I live it out. And it's actually exactly why you can trust me to not put my politics in everything I do. And I don't, and I never have, because I have a philosophy that says the law is what comes first. And those are the justices that I look up to and admire.
And our next question from Jessica will begin with Judge Hagedorn.
Related to what you were just talking about there, while this race is officially nonpartisan, it is fair to say that you both have significant ties to political parties in Wisconsin. Judge Hagedorn, you were legal counsel for Governor Scott Walker, were appointed to the bench by him, and were a member of the Republican Party. Judge Neubauer, you've worked for Democrats, were appointed to the court by a Democrat, and your family has given significant donations to federal and state Democratic candidates. Given those extensive connections of both of you with political parties, how are voters supposed to believe that your partisan influences won't influence your decisions on the court?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. You know, everybody who comes to the bench has a view about the world. They all have ideas about the way the world ought to work, policies, politics, whatever. And that's why the key question really is judicial philosophy at the end of the day. There's actually nothing wrong with working in public service, as I've done. Judge Neubauer said I was a political operative. She obviously doesn't understand what I've done. I was Governor Walker's chief legal counsel. I was a lawyer for the office of the governor, representing him in a legal capacity. I didn't do politics. I did law. And I did law at a very high level for a long period of time. And I'm really proud of that, because that actually highlights the experience that I have. I've litigated significant cases in the Supreme Court. And here's where the rubber meets the road. You know, the justice we're seeking to replace, in all the cases that I was litigating before the court, I could tell you how she was going to vote on every single case that I had there. And that's wrong. And Judge Neubauer has upheld that justice as a model justice for her own judicial philosophy. That's politicizing the court. That's holding up a political end. And that's why voters, I think, should be concerned about judges who hold up a more political form of judging, because then personal views really do matter at the end of the day in politics. But in my situation, nobody's ever criticized me for any case I have ever written or decided that I've somehow allowed my politics to influence it. Not one bit, because I never have and I never will.
Thank you, Judge Hagedorn. Judge Neubauer.
Yes, thank you. Again, this is a really important question, because the people in our state need to have confidence in our courts. And I am running because we need to have our people understand that our courts are there for us. Then when people walk through our courthouse doors, they often have so much at stake. They're for victims, for people at risk of losing their liberty, their homes, their children, their livelihood, their rights. And our people need to know that when they walk through those courthouse doors, there's no thumb on the scale, there's no agenda, there's no predetermined outcomes, it's not a rigged system, it's a level playing field. And that's the kind of judge I have been for 11 years. I am deeply committed to the proper role of our judiciary as the nonpartisan third branch that is the people's branch, that is there for our people. Now, my opponent has not only had extensive writings in a blog about his views not on pretty sunsets, but on key constitutional issues. And again, the voters need to have confidence in our courts, and that's what this election is about.
Can I respond to that?
30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. You know, I agree with Judge Neubauer that we want to have a non-political courts, but the problem is, in Judge Neubauer's very first press release, she held out as a model a justice who has been anything but. And so a lot of people will say they believe in the law, but the question is, and your rhetoric is part of your record, and your rhetoric here has been that you hold this model up as a justice, somebody who has been political. And I've been in the court where I know I wasn't going to get a fair shake. And it was that, and that is the problem. That is what we do not want on our courts.
Thank you, Judge Hagedorn. JR with the next question.
Judge Neubauer, at the beginning of the race, you urged outside money to stay out of the campaign. Now, reports filed with the Ethics Commission and TV records show so far that you are enjoying a healthy advantage in that regard. By one count, the spending has been more than $400,000 in your favor, at about $55,000 for Judge Hagedorn, with more money to come from a group linked to Eric Holder, former Attorney General. You said you still want outside money to stay out, but are you prepared tonight to call on those groups to drop their efforts and pull their ads?
You know, when I announced my candidacy, I called on outside money to stay out of this race. I believe that then, and I believe it now. I have been consistent throughout my campaign, but we now have outside money coming in. The Koch brothers, for my opponent, has joined in this race. And again, this is about our people having confidence that our judges are going to be fair, impartial, and independent. I want to go back a little bit to one question you asked about the who's supporting us. I have very broad bipartisan support in this race. 345 judges, that is judges from red counties and blue counties. Just within the last few weeks, judges from Wood County, sheriffs, DAs from Jefferson, from Kewaunee, from Washington County, 13 judges who saw us at a forum a week ago joined in to support my campaign. Bipartisan elected Democratic and Republican sheriffs, DAs, former DAs, over 80 all across this state. So again, when you look at my support, I have very broad bipartisan support. And why is that? Because they trust me to be the kind of judge that I have been for 11 years on the Court of Appeals.
Thank you, Judge Neubauer. Judge Hagedorn.
Well, Judge Neubauer didn't answer your question, and I think it's important for people to get an answer to that question because Judge Neubauer has not been consistent in this race. If she were consistent, Eric Holder said he was going to be getting involved in this race in November, and she said nothing. When the attack ads have started against me from outside groups, she's not only not told them to not run those ads, but she has been continuing to pass on all the smears and talking points that we've seen in this race. So she's been an active participant in making this a toxic race. She has been actively cooperating with the liberal special interest groups that are supporting her. And I think people need to ask, why is that? And here's the answer. The answer is that the liberal special interest groups that are going all in for Judge Neubauer in this race, they want to take over the Supreme Court because they want to politicize it. They want the court to be part of their political agenda, and they think Judge Neubauer is exactly the person for the job. And that's why they're spending the money they are, because they've got a political agenda. It's not about law, it's about politics for them, and Judge Neubauer is their candidate. Now, I believe in the right of everyone to speak freely, and I will defend everyone's right to freedom of speech. It should be exercised responsibly. Unfortunately, it's often not been in this race, but courts matter, and I think it's important to have voices weigh in because what we do really does matter.
Thank you, Judge Hagedorn. The next question also from J.R.
Judge Hagedorn, there have been media reports this campaign detailing your blog post from 13 years ago. They include arguing his U.S. Supreme Court decision striking down anti-sodomy law could open the door to legalizing bestiality. There have also been reports on your continual association with a private Christian school that bars employees and students from being in same-sex relationships. In response, you have said these stories are amounting to an attack on your faith. But in 2006, you wrote about whether evangelical Christians could vote for Mitt Romney, a Mormon. In that post, you wrote, and I'm quoting here, "The bottom line, Mormon theology is blatant heresy." How can you now decry criticism of your positions as an attack on your faith when critics see that line, your post on Mormonism, as an attack on the faith of others?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's been a lot of misreporting on issues in this race, including my blog writings, making me say something that I never said at the end of the day. Here's the important thing for people to know, and that is that I have always, in my personal life and as a judge, as an attorney, treated everyone with dignity and respect, and I believe that to my core. And the arguments that have been made against me is that because I started a Christian school, for example, and volunteering at that, which, by the way, another example of misreporting, you don't need to be a Christian to be for parents or students. They don't need to sign on to any policy. It's just staff. And the policies I have are not aimed at people. They're aimed at conduct, and they're similar to what you'd find in Christian schools, Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, other schools of faith all around the state, and many ones that you probably attended, many of the ones that you probably send your children to. I am a Christian, and so it's okay to have disagreements about these sorts of questions, but I am deeply dedicated because of that, and just in general, because our Constitution protects it, to protecting the religious freedom of everyone in this state. I've never run on my moral views or my religious views. It's actually my opponent and her liberal allies who just want to keep bringing these things up. Quite frankly, it's because they think that's what must matter. But I don't think that matters. What matters is my judicial philosophy and the law, and I've been consistent in that all along, and nobody can point to any example of me ever bringing in my own faith into my decision-making.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Judge Neubauer.
Thank you. This is a really important question because, again, I think it goes to the issue of whether the voters can trust my opponent to be fair, impartial, and independent. The blog writings are extensive. They are not just about whether he likes green grass and nice sunsets. They are on key constitutional issues that have great impact on people's lives. And my opponent has not only written about these key issues, he has acted upon them with the school, speaking year after year after year to a group that's been labeled a hate group because of their positions on gays. And he, when he was working for the governor, he declined to support the same-sex registry that allowed gay people to visit their partners in the hospital. So it's not just writings, it's actions, and it's actions year after year after year. And the voters need to look at that and say, can they trust that this person will be fair, impartial, and independent? Or will they have an agenda, an ideology, a thumb on the scale? I have been fair, impartial, and independent for over 11 years, and I have the support of over 345 judges because of that.
I'd like to respond to that, please.
30 seconds for your
Thank
rebuttal.
you. That's really shameful, Judge Neubauer. It's shameful. The attacks that you're making are shameful, and they're not just against me. They are just against people of faith generally. There is nothing inconsistent about being a faithful Catholic or a faithful Christian or a faithful person of faith and also being a faithful judge at the same time. There's nothing wrong with speaking to law students about how to make a difference with their legal careers. And some of what you're saying is just flat out untrue. In fact, you're spreading the talking points from those very special interest groups that you once called toxic that you're now embracing. It's shameful.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Our next question begins with Judge Neubauer, and it comes from Jessica Arp.
As we have watched confirmation hearings for the federal bench in recent years, the question has been asked of the candidates regularly, is Roe v. Wade the law of the land? Do you believe that Roe v. Wade is settled law? And how should justices view precedent in a changing legal landscape?
Thank you. Yes, really this is a question, again, about sort of our judicial philosophy, but also how do we look at the law? What's our approach? And my approach has always been, with every single case I have, to come to each case with an open mind, no agenda, no ideology. I look at the Constitution, I look at the law, and I do my level best to figure out how it applies to the case before us. So Roe v. Wade, yes, it is settled law in this country, and that is where we stand. So, again, in terms of when something is settled law, when it becomes precedential, the issues of stare decisis, those are issue by issue, case by case. And I would come to every case with an open mind. My opponent has expressed significant opinions on the issue of a Roe v. Wade and whether it is settled law, whether it is good law. And again, it's not just his writings, it's his actions at every single phase of his career, including when he put on the robe, the actions he's taken as a judge.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn.
Except she can cite no examples for that. Here's the interesting thing about this issue, and I've spoken openly. My job as a judge is to apply all the law that we have. I've always said I will follow binding precedent from the United States Supreme Court. So Roe versus Wade, other cases like that, they are binding precedent. It's my obligation to follow them until such time as the United States Supreme Court decides to change something. That should be true of any judge that we have. In fact, I've always been faithful to follow the precedent that governs us. Again, that's what I do faithfully day in and day out as a judge. I just need to respond to Judge Neubauer's attacks here and just clear up the record. She can cite to no examples of my time as a judge when I have ever allowed my personal beliefs to impact the cases that I write. And some of the things that she's bringing up, my work for the governor, she's just blatantly wrong. I don't know if she's trying to just mislead people or if she's just taking talking points from One Wisconsin Now and the other groups that are supporting her and spreading them around. But that's just flat out not true. In that case, the court actually, there were already two parties litigating the case, and the governor had made a decision. I was his lawyer. I did not make any decisions. And I wrote to the court and said the governor doesn't want to defend the law further. We didn't file any other arguments in that case. The other parties did. So Judge Neubauer, I think, is deliberately trying to mislead voters. And that's unfortunate that we can't have an honest debate without her resorting to not telling the truth.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. For our next question, J.R. Ross, starting with Judge Hagedorn.
The state Supreme Court 2010 approved a rule that says essentially spending elections on its own is not enough to force a judge off a case. There's been debate about that, whether there should be a bright line about spending or if a bright line would be restrict the First Amendment rights of those who donate to campaigns. I have a two-part question for you. One, should donations be enough to force a judge to step off a case? And two, should that rule also basically says only a judge or justice can decide to recuse him or herself? Should there be a procedure to allow other judges or justices to force a colleague off a case if their conflict is so severe it would taint the proceedings?
Sure. Well, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has appointed me to the Wisconsin Judicial Commission. So I actually serve on the commission that oversees the Code of Judicial Ethics for all judges in the state of Wisconsin. So I'm very well aware of the issues that are judicial disciplinary questions that come before the court. I see those regularly, and we make essentially prosecutorial decisions about whether there should be complaints that are filed. Regarding the issue of recusal, I think it's fine for us to go ahead and study that question. It is clear, I think in some situations when a substantial donation has been given, judges ought to step off those cases if that case is pending before you, for example. We saw that in the Caperton case, and certainly if there was a substantial donation while a case was pending before me, I would recuse from that. And I'm certainly always open to having discussions about how we can make our courts places where people do have confidence. The real issue with confidence in the courts, though, and that's what the recusal rule is about, is when judges become political. When judges hold up as a model, as Judge Neubauer has, a political form of decision-making, that's the real critical crisis in our courts, is that people feel like they can't go into courts and that people will have a thumb on the scale because they have philosophies like Judge Neubauer's held up as a wonderful model. And I'm actually really concerned about that. We can't allow our courts to become politicized. We can't allow partisan politics to rule the day. And that's the most critical question in building trust and confidence in our courts.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Judge Neubauer.
Thank you. This is a really important question. It's a really important issue for our state, and it goes to the same issues associated with this election. And that is, how do we ensure that our public has confidence in our judiciary, that it is truly the independent, impartial third branch that is there for our people, and not the Koch brother money that comes into our races. So on the recusal issue, our Supreme Court adopted a rule that said every judge gets to decide for themselves. Some people call it the no rule recusal rule. There were a number of retired judges who submitted a petition to our Supreme Court and did a lot of work, and it basically said we need to be thinking about how we can address when millions and millions of dollars come into our Supreme Court races and try to partisanize our court. And our Supreme Court decided to not even have a public hearing. And to me, that is shameful. It is anti-democratic. It is a disregard for the public and the public's confidence in our court system. We have to have our people know that our courts are there for them and not the millions of dollars that has been spent over the last decade on our Supreme Court races.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Jessica has our next question.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court was one of the first courts in the country to open its administrative deliberations to the media and the public in 1999. Since then, later courts have chosen to close and then reopen those rulemaking conferences, with the most recent vote in 2017 to close them again. Do you believe those conferences should be open to the media and the public?
Begin with Judge Hagedorn or Judge Neubauer? Judge Neubauer, begin.
Yes, I do. The Supreme Court recently voted to close its rulemaking conferences. To me, this is a question, again, about how do we ensure that our people have confidence in our court. And I am all in favor of transparency, sunshine. Let the sun shine in. So we need to have those conferences be open so that people can see the decisions our court makes about such things as the recusal rule that we just talked about. This is a really important question for our state because, again, it goes to our democracy. This race is about our democracy. It's about whether those courts are the independent, impartial third branch. The recusal rule, the open meetings, those all are important issues for the voters to be thinking about in terms of, can we trust that our courts are there for our people? Now, my opponent on recusal issues there's a lot of issues here. As Governor Walker's legal counsel, he drafted and defended as a lawyer numerous laws, and now is saying, well, I might not necessarily recuse. Again, the public needs to look at all this information, and there is a lot, and make these important decisions about who they trust.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn.
As far as I understand, the rule that was in place in Wisconsin was the only place in the country where they actually had a rule like that, and that no other places in the country have actually followed suit. So it's the best way to conduct the administrative role of the court, what needs to be in public, what doesn't. Again, I'm open to considering that. I'm open to hearing good ideas on that. The goal is the same. The goal is to build confidence in a court, that we are transparent, that we build confidence that we're a place that's collegial and respectful. Unfortunately, a lot of those open hearings became places that didn't build confidence in the court, where there was a lot of infighting, which is a problem in and of itself, with a divisiveness and not getting along in the court. So I think that's an important point that we need to make sure we're building confidence in our courts through all sorts of different ways, including by getting along well together. So I'm open to discussing it, as I am with many other questions and what we need to do on that. I just want to comment briefly on the special interest money again. I think people need to ask the question, why has special interest money come to dominate these races over the last 10 years? And I think the answer to that question, quite frankly, is because courts have become a super legislature rather than courts committed to law. And when you have the rule of judges rather than the rule of law, when judges begin to act like legislators, as the justice does, who my opponent holds up as a model, then it's no surprise when the people treat them that way. And that's why we have this problem and why we need to go back to judges who are faithful to applying the law.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. And Judge Hagedorn gets the next question first from J.R. Ross.
State Supreme Court 2015 ended a John Doe probe and allegations coordination between Governor Scott Walker's campaign and independent groups. In that decision, for the first time, it ruled that collaboration between issue groups and campaigns was not illegal. Not long after, GOP lawmakers rewrote campaign finance laws with a package that included codifying that piece of the decision. Do you agree with the court's rationale in that case? And two, has your campaign taken advantage of the change in law to work with outside groups in this election?
Thank you. So in terms of the substance of the case, it's not something I'd feel comfortable commenting on for a variety of reasons, but I'll answer the second question. No, we are not doing any coordination with any outside groups at all who are doing any of the issue advocacy as I think the law might now allow. And again, I think this goes to the core of why these special interest groups are getting involved. We need to have courts that are faithful to applying the law, who are textualists and originalists and going to set aside their personal views. And despite what my opponent wants to say, you cannot look at the record of the justice that she holds up as a model and see anything other than somebody who has been a political activist on the court. And I've seen it because I've litigated those cases. I've been in that courtroom. I could tell you how she was going to vote on every single case I had when I was representing the governor. She was going to vote against me because she did not like my client or my client's politics. So to say on the one hand, I believe in applying the law, but then not explain anything about what that means. On the other hand, to hold up a model, a political form of judging, is saying one thing and doing another. The same thing that we've seen that Judge Neubauer is now doing when it comes to outside money, saying one thing in doing another. We need judges we can trust who are going to be faithful to their word and who are going to be faithful to applying the law, and I am and I will.
Judge Neubauer.
Thank you. Again, yes, the Code of Judicial Conduct does preclude me as a judge and also as a candidate for the Supreme Court and commenting on any issue that might come before the court. And so it is extraordinarily important that we uphold that. And that is why, I am not out there signaling to people, as my opponent is, every single day in his campaign, how he's going to be coming out as a judge. I've been all over this state. I've been to almost 40 courthouse visits. I've met with hundreds of people. I now have the support of 98% of the endorsing judges, over 80 Democratic and Republican sheriffs, DAs, and former DAs. And what people tell me over and over again is they don't want a liberal and they don't want a conservative. They want a judge. That's our job. And we need to value that and uphold that and fight for that in order to make sure that our people have confidence that when they walk through those doors, there's no agenda, no ideology, no partisanship that meets them. That's the kind of judge I've been for over 11 years. And that is what I am not only deeply committed to, it is why I have the kind of support that I've gotten in this campaign.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. And Jessica has our next question.
In a 2008 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that the right to bear arms enumerated in the Second Amendment to the Constitution did not only apply to a militia or members of the military, but to all individuals. The ruling was 5-4, and it has remained a controversial decision. Would you have sided with the majority or the minority in this case, and why?
Said to me? Thank you. Again, you know, I have always held myself to the highest ethical standards, and I will continue to do so every single day as a judge. And again, the rules of judicial conduct preclude me from commenting on the merits of any case, any issue that might come before our court. Why is that? Why do we have that rule? We have that rule because our people need to have confidence that there's no prejudging when they walk into that courtroom, that every single case the judge is going to or the justice is going to have an open mind to look at each and every individual case with the facts and the law. And that's what I've done for 11 years. So I'm going to decline to answer your question on the merits because I think it is so important for our judiciary to be that body that people trust to protect our people. Now, my opponent has been out there signaling how he feels on all sorts of issues that are going to be coming before the courts. Fundamental constitutional issues that are going to have a huge impact on the people in our state. And he asks people, well, I'll set them aside. But that's not the question. The question is, who do you trust? Do you trust someone like that with those kinds of writings and actions to be that fair, impartial, independent justice?
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn.
Well, you know, I think it should be concerning, similar to the question we saw about judicial philosophy, where Judge Neubauer doesn't want to answer the question and tell people what she actually believes about issues. We do have a code of judicial conduct that does restrict what we can say about some things, but it certainly does not prevent us from commenting on every sort of question that comes. That's just not true. That's not how it comes out. We can comment on those things. You know, the thing about the Heller decision when it was decided, it was a decision that was based upon the original public meaning of the Constitution, looking at what those words say. So the best thing I can say right now is that they actually used the right approach. We look at what it says. It wasn't about, do we think that gun laws are good or bad? Do we think that we need to enforce some and not others? And that's not what the job of a judge is. And so there's a big debate going on about those issues in our country. But the job of a judge is to be faithful to the law as it's actually written. More to the point, we actually have a right to bear arms. It's in the Wisconsin Constitution, which we are obligated to uphold and enforce. And it's something that I will uphold and enforce and protect, precisely because we, the people, have put it into our Constitution. And that's what every judge ought to do. Far too often we see judges who say on a significant social question, they pick and choose what they like or don't like. They balance things to see what's good policy. But that's not what judges do. Judges are faithful to the law as it's written. That's the kind of judge I've been. That's the kind of judge I'll be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, unlike what Judge Neubauer has upheld as a model.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. And JR's next question will begin with Judge Hagedorn.
You both sit in the Second District Court of Appeals. You're spending a part of the night trying to lay out differences between the two of you. But WISC-Politics.com and others have looked at the decisions you both have joined while on the bench. And looking at those decisions, there are a handful of cases in which you've disagreed. So how do you convince voters, persuade them, that there will be a significant difference in who's on the Supreme Court next when there's so few differences in black and white on the page?
Sure, great question. Merrick Garland and Brett Kavanaugh both sat on the same court, too. One appointed by President Obama to the Supreme Court, one appointed by President Trump. And there were vigorous fights over those appointments. And they agreed almost all the time, just like Judge Neubauer and I do. And why is that? The reason is, on the Intermediate Court of Appeals where we sit, our ability to impact the law big picture is actually rather modest. We have to follow the precedents from the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court and Wisconsin Supreme Court, of course. We can't blaze sort of new ground and clarify an area even where we think it might be wrong, not consistent with the text. And so that's one reason why you don't see a lot of disagreement. But when you get to those levels at the Supreme Court level, that's when you get to that's when you see those differences amplified in a significant way. And there really are. And that's why it's so unfortunate that Judge Neubauer doesn't really want to share with people what our judicial philosophy really is and just utter kind of empty catchphrases. It's important for people to know how that philosophy bears itself out, which judges you model yourself after, because those do make a difference. That's why we have these discussions and these debates over these issues as a culture and a society. And so, I'm proud to have, I would add, we work with 2 judges on this Court of Appeals. The only judge that's endorsing me, knows my work. Proud to have the support of 5 Supreme Court justices. The people that actually know and review our work are supporting me in this case, because this race, because they trust me.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Judge Neubauer.
Yes, thank you. Really great question. Again, I agree with Judge Hagedorn that we are an error-correcting court. But again, I have 11 years, thousands and thousands of decisions. And what those decisions show is that I am tough but fair, and that I look at every single case with an open mind. I now have not only the support of 345 judges, 98% of the judges endorsing this race, but I am honored to have the support of 10 former State Bar presidents, the former executive director of the State Bar. I also have the support of Democratic and Republican sheriffs and DAs all over the state. Why is that? Because every single case I approach with an open mind, with no thumb on the scale, with no judicial ideology. And so this is such an important issue for our state, for our voters, because we need people to know there's a level playing field. There's no thumb on the scale, that everyone who walks through our courthouse doors is going to get a fair shake. That's the kind of judge I've been. That's the kind of justice I will continue to be.
If I could respond to that, please.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I think it's incredibly important for people to look at what's happened even here tonight. Judge Neubauer has put personal views front and center in this race. She is repeatedly trying to attack me for how I live my life personally. Why is that? Well, the only time people raise those issues is because they think that's what matters when you're judging. Either that or they're just gratuitous attacks. And so somebody who's running on personal and religious views is running because they have a bias. And that's what we're seeing out of Judge Neubauer tonight, despite her rhetoric.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Judge Neubauer, you will be answering the next question first from Jessica.
You both have had a great deal of responsibility in your legal roles as attorneys and judges. What is the one argument or decision that you have made in the past that is now furthest from your current thinking legally, or that you might regret now?
Well, again, I have been on the Court of Appeals for 11 years. I literally have decided thousands of cases. I have written and published hundreds of not only cases that have precedential value, but cases that have persuasive value. So I'm not a blank slate. I'm disinclined to go back and look at and highlight any particular case because, again, we have issues that there are revolving doors. We have issues that come before us repeatedly over time. And I don't want to in any way signal that I would be, prejudging or deciding a case that might come before our court in the future. So it's really important to me to do that. Now, I want to respond to my opponent for 1 minute because I think that this is not about us and our personal views. My opponent asks people to believe him, that he's going to put his personal views aside. That's not the question. It is not about us. It's about the public. The recusal analysis, the fair, impartial, independent analysis, that is for the people. That is the people's decision. So our individual point of view is really missing the point here. It's about whether you, the voters, are going to trust my opponent to put those views aside and be fair, impartial, and independent.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn.
Thank you. Well, I have been on the bench and issued hundreds of decisions, been involved in hundreds of decisions. I don't know that I can go back at this point and say, boy, I have some significant regrets. I put a lot of work into the cases that I have, and usually I think I get it right. But, one point I do want to make, when you are an attorney, I think it's important for people to recognize this. when you're an attorney, you're representing a client and your client's interests. Not necessarily what your own perspective is or your own views. In fact, that's what all good attorneys do. I find it fascinating that Judge Neubauer has attacked me tonight for work I've done as an attorney representing a client and perspectives that it's my job to zealously advocate for my client's interests. So I don't understand if she doesn't believe in the difference between those things, or if it's just an effort to throw out the talking points from One Wisconsin Now and these other groups that are working in helping her campaign. So have I agreed with every decision where I've been an attorney? No. In fact, it's regular that you might have a different view of where the law ought to go than when you actually argue a case, and that's the mark of a good attorney. Same principle applies when you're a judge. I don't have to like the outcome. In fact, I regularly may not like the outcome of cases, but you be faithful and apply the law as it's written. I've always done that, and I've been faithful to that, and will continue to do it on the Supreme Court.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. And Jessica, we're getting close on time, so this may be our last question. Jessica will begin directing it to Judge Hagedorn.
You've both talked a lot tonight about the endorsements that you've had in this race. And we took a look at what you both had published about the endorsements that you've gotten. Right now, when you look at both of your lists, no current state circuit court or municipal judges have endorsed you, Judge Hagedorn, and no current Supreme Court justices have endorsed you, Judge Neubauer. How do you each explain those gaps in your support, and what should people believe about why those particular groups may not be supporting you?
Sure, thank you for that. Actually, I've got all kinds of support. Just because it's not on my website doesn't mean it's not there. I've got judges all across the state who are supporting me as well as district attorneys. So I've got plenty of them all across the state of Wisconsin that are lining up behind my campaign. So, you know, I understand that's not the thing I'm putting front and center in this race, because I'm trying to put the big ideas, what actually matters in this race, and the people who know our work and review our work. And those are the members of the Supreme Court who see what we do every day. I mean, Judge Gundrum, who Judge Neubauer and I work with, again, one of two colleagues that we work with closely, and he's supporting me in this race. And he's not on my website, but that doesn't mean he's not supporting me in this race. And I can list all sorts of other colleagues, municipal judges and circuit court judges around the state. And when I travel all around the state, as I have, I will bring it up when I go to those counties where it's relevant. So I certainly have lots of district attorneys, lots of judges all across the state who are supporting me. And again, really honored to have the support of 5 Supreme Court justices, because those are the people that review our work. It's not just retired judges, as a lot of the list of my opponent really is in this race. Those are the people who know what we do day in and day out. I've worked at the Supreme Court, and they know my work. They trust me, and I've earned their respect, and I'm really proud to have it.
Judge Hagedorn, thank you. Judge Neubauer.
Thank you. Great question. Yes, I do have the support of over 345 judges. What does that mean? Well, there are 264 trial courts in our state. There are 16 Court of Appeals judges. I have 345 judges supporting me. Over 98% of the judges endorsing this race are supporting me. And they are willing to support me publicly. I have put them on my website. Now, on our Court of Appeals, we have 16 judges. I have 10 of the current Court of Appeals judges supporting me. I have 15 of the former Court of Appeals judges supporting me. Why are they supporting me? Well, they know me. They know my record. They know my opponent. They know his record. They know that I have been fair, impartial, and independent for over 11 years on the Court of Appeals. They, like all of the other judges who have stepped forward to publicly support me, want us as a state to get back to a place where we are electing our justices based on experience and qualifications and merit. And I have over 30 years in the law, 20 as a litigator, 11 on the Court of Appeals.
Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Hagedorn, thank you as well for your thoughtful responses to their questions. JR and Jessica, thank you for your questions. That wraps up the question portion of our debate tonight. We will now move to closing statements. You each will get 1 minute. Based on the results of our coin flip, that first closing statement will come from Judge Hagedorn. You may begin.
Thank you. This race really is about the future of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Are we going to have a court that's based upon the rule of law, or do we want the rule of judges? And my opponent doesn't want to shoot straight with you. She doesn't want to tell you what she really believes. She says one thing and she does another. And that's what we've seen tonight. That's what we've seen throughout this campaign. It's important for us to not have a court that's politicized. The liberal special interests who are all in for Judge Neubauer want to take over our Supreme Court, and they want to turn it into their political playground. That's what they're about, and that's why you're seeing all this money being spent on her behalf that she used to call toxic, but now she's just fine with. We cannot allow that to happen to our court. We need a court that is faithful to the law, and that's exactly what I will be. So if you don't want a court that's a super legislature, then I'm asking you and the voters of Wisconsin to stand with me on April 2nd. If you believe in the rule of law and not the rule of judges, stand with me, along with 44 sheriffs, more than my opponent, Milwaukee Police, 5 Supreme Court justices, and thousands of Wisconsinites on April 2nd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Hagedorn. 1 minute closing statement for you, Judge Neubauer.
Thank you. Again, thank you to the State Bar. Thank you, moderators, WISC Politics. I am so grateful to have had this chance to speak directly to the voters. What the voters can see is that there are very clear, significant differences between me and my opponent. I have extensive experience in the law, over 30 years. I was 20 years as a litigator, 11 years on the Court of Appeals, twice elected or appointed by the Supreme Court to be the chief judge of our 16-member Court of Appeals. I have broad, bipartisan support. Throughout this state, the 345 judges are from red counties and blue counties. The over 80 law enforcement officials, the same can be said. People who know our work, the 98% of the judges endorsing this race, know that I will be fair, impartial, independent, that I am fair but tough, and I will protect our communities.
Thank you, Judge Neubauer. I'd like our crowd to give a round of applause for our candidates. And thank you both once again for coming tonight and spending the evening with us discussing these important issues here in Madison. And that concludes tonight's debate between the two candidates running for Wisconsin Supreme Court. Again, we hope this helps you, the voter, decide on April 2nd who should be the next justice of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. We'd like to thank our candidates again, as well as our partners, the State Bar of Wisconsin, the folks at WISC Politics, J.R. Ross for being with us tonight. I'm Eric Franke. Good evening, and have a good weekend.